Welcome to Outrage Overload, a science podcast about outrage and lowering the temperature. This is episode 69. If you spend any time in the bridge building or depolarization space, you've probably already heard about the connection opportunity. It's a new report from More in Common that's got a lot of people talking, and for good reason. It's one of the most comprehensive studies to date on how Americans feel about connecting across lines of race, class, religion, and politics. And while the findings confirm some things we might expect, they also surface some powerful surprises. And of course, as we're recording this, tensions are high around the country. In Los Angeles, protests and security responses have sparked intense reactions. We don't know what that situation will look like by the time this episode airs, but the emotional temperature right now underscores just how fragile our sense of connection has become and how urgent these conversations really are. So we're going to dig into all of that today on Outrage Overload. I'm your host, David Beckemeyer, and I'm thrilled to welcome two of the report's key contributors, Kate Carney, Deputy Director of More in Common, and Calista Small, Research Manager and co-author of The Connection Opportunity. Kate and Calista, welcome to Outrage Overload.
Hi, so excited to be here. Thanks for having us.
Hi, yeah.
Awesome. So could you each briefly introduce yourselves and your role in the project?
Sure. I'm Kate Carney. I am Deputy Director of More in Common US. Wear a bunch of different hats in the organization, but one of them was helping to lead this project on social connection.
Hi, yes, and I'm Calista Small. I'm the Research Manager for the US team at More in Common. So I conduct qualitative and quantitative studies on a range of topics related to social cohesion and division in the United States. And I also worked very closely with Kate on this report, and I'm one of the co-authors.
That's great. Thank you. Before we jump into the deeper discussion, could you give us a quick overview of those key findings and maybe tell us why you think the report is generating so much energy in the community right now?
Sure. Happy to, David. So as some of you may know, More in Common, we are a nonpartisan research organization really trying to understand what are the forces driving us apart, how do we find common ground, and how do we help bring people together across our shared challenges. And we primarily do that by producing insights that are grounded in what are our experiences, values, beliefs that shape how we see one another, ourselves, our world, and how that may feed into misperceptions. And part of that, of what we try to do as an organization is ultimately, how are we trying to figure out how we live, work, and thrive together? And to do that, you have to be able to build social connection across with one another. It helps build social trust, strong communities, etc. And we inherently live in a country that's just inherently diverse, the United States. And so we have to be able to build connections, not just with people who are like us, but also people who may not share the same qualities or beliefs. So we really wanted to dig into how can we who's interested in connecting across difference and what the barriers people face so that we can equip community leaders with better tools, insights that can help, bring people together across difference. And so we set out over 2 years, surveyed thousands of Americans across the country to really kind of get at these questions, looking at connections across difference in race, class, politics, and religion. And we can highlight, there's tons of insights are on our website and the report, but I think 3 at least key ones that I'm happy to share with you all today is, one, we found a surprisingly hopeful story. Americans say that they have a strong interest in connecting with one another, even across their differences. 70% of Americans believe we have a responsibility to connect across our difference. 2/3 of Americans across a whole host of demographics think that we can learn something new from connecting with somebody who may be different from us. And when we asked Americans, we gave them about 7 different types of activities where they might be connecting with someone who shares one of those different qualities. Everything from inviting somebody into your home, going to a social event, working in your community, even talking kind of about group tensions. There was still a majority of Americans who were interested in those types of activities. And the thing that people were most interested in doing is working together on a common goal in your community, which we find was just so hopeful because that's an activity that really can benefit a lot of communities if you get people working together to improve where you live. So the first one, we find a broad appetite for connection. But then we wanted to know if people are interested, what's holding them back? What's preventing them from doing so? And again, we gave a whole host of different types of barriers, everything from I don't think it's important, I don't really like them, I think it would be uncomfortable, I don't know if they would understand me. And some of these, generated some responses, but the most commonly cited reason was lack of opportunity. So people either don't see these opportunities in their life or don't feel like that they have them to be able to build those connections. So part of it is, how do we think about creating those opportunities where people that are accessible to them, where they can start to build these relationships with one another. And then the third one that I think is important to highlight is, we wanted to know what predicts interest in connecting across difference. We threw a whole host of different factors into a research analysis, looking at demographics, behaviors, psychological characteristics. And the one that stuck out the most, that was the strongest predictor of interest, was community norms. So if you think other people in your community value this and are doing it, then you're going to be more interested in doing it yourself. And so that also leads to, how do we think about building that culture of connection where this is just something that you see and you recognize people are doing in your community. And then the second predictor, but in the opposite direction, is intergroup anxiety. So if you think the experience is going to be uncomfortable, you don't really know how it's going to go, you might have anxiety about interacting with certain groups of people, you're not going to want to do it, which makes tons of sense. And so it was just really interesting as those two features, how they relate to interest, and what are the ways that we can help work with those to build interest in this culture of connection.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to jump into some of the tension that, I sort of hear from people on the street. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit. I mean, in the report, and you mentioned this, that people do want to connect across these different lines of race, religion, and so on. And people even talk about it, sort of their responsibility to do so. And they want to work towards shared goals. But in the report, you dig a little deeper, it gets more complicated. Like you mentioned, people cite, opportunity, discomfort, fear of being misunderstood. And when it comes to politics in particular, interest did drop. So, this brings me to something that we've seen in these, this is not scientific, these sort of anecdotal interviews and conversations that we've had with people on the street. And, they're probably a little bit self-selecting because they are interested in this show and the topic. And so they probably are already people that, say they want connection. They want to see, the rhetoric, toned down, this kind of thing. But sometimes when you start pushing on that, they want to do that as long as it doesn't challenge them too much. They want to do that, so sometimes I ask the question, and I don't know if you see this in your qualitative data, that are they really looking to learn and to understand, or are they just looking to get conformity to try to convert people?
That's a really great question. And I think the way that people have responded to these, we can at least take that as aspirational in the very least, that this is something that people want to do and what they believe about themselves. You have to take them at least for their word for that. I think when it comes to politics, the data definitely stands out a little bit. People are definitely more apprehensive about talking about our political differences. There's lower levels of interest in activities, and the barriers pop out a little bit more. People don't think it's important. They lack energy. It's freaking exhausting. I don't think that they want to interact with me. The concerns for personal safety are higher. I don't really like them. Those ones do pop out a little bit more for political differences. And I think part of it is reflective of the time that we're living in. And going back to that community norms piece, if you think other people are interested in value it, then you're going to be more interested in doing it yourself. And we're in a time where political polarization is so front and center. And it's not something that we see people being able to value and connecting across, at least publicly, or something that people value. And it's the primary identity that we classify people in. We tend to see people and we try to figure out maybe who they voted for, and then we think we know everything about them. We don't try to see people for other types of identities, who they are. So there are these barriers that I think make politics and connecting across political differences really challenging. And our society is built in, the incentives built in, that has kind of entrenched that kind of left-right 50-50 divide, which just makes this hard, I think, just frankly. And so the dynamics make it really hard to have constructive conversations about politics. Partisan animosity is at an all-time high. And this stuff also takes skill, I think, to be able to do. So to expect people to come together let's talk about our political differences in a constructive way. It's possible, but given all of the dynamics, we're not setting ourselves up for success in that. And so I think there are those dynamics that do play to how people are really feeling on the ground. But that doesn't mean I think that we can't do some things to help kind of unlock that in different ways.
Right. And I just want to add that in our research, we found again that the most people said they had interest in connecting with someone who was from had a different political viewpoint than them when they were working together to achieve a goal in their community. And so when you talk about issues of like conformity, I don't think those come up as much because in that specific activity, because if you're working together on a shared goal, it's not about talking about your political differences or reconciling them like interpersonally. It's about creating something for your community that will better your community. And everybody wants to do that. And so I think that if we can create more opportunities that allow people to have that experience, maybe this issue of conformity won't be as relevant in these situations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I wonder if that could happen on almost like a micro level, like even in a personal scenario. The first focus can we find something we want as a shared goal, right? Before we dive into some of that other stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's really also elevated in our research that we weren't as expecting, is, again, the types of things that people are most interested in doing are those things where they are working together towards something. And when we asked people what would make you more likely to engage with someone across X background, including politics, it was working together. And if I was convinced or confident that we had something in common. So I think it's also about how do we start in a place where there's some sort of understanding of something that we share. And a lot of kind of conversations and work, even sometimes in the bridging movement, is like really focused on the politics. And it's a place of tension and automatic division and a lot of feelings on both sides. And it's not that those tensions should be avoided or that we shouldn't talk about politics, but as a way to engage those differences, maybe there's another way through. And it's again focused again on how can we bring people together around some sort of shared identity, interest, purpose. And that through that mechanism, you can help kind of better develop that understanding, see people as people, work through some of those differences, and build those connections with one another.
Sometimes I have my ear to the ground too much, maybe, because I do spend a lot of time as an observer in social media. And in many times, so I'm guilty of having those misperceptions because what I see on social media probably isn't a great representation of people, but you sort of see the worst in people, right? Or at least the most polarized in people, I guess I'll say. Where, they just take anything, they make it a polarized thing, and then it starts a fight, and then both sides are at each other. But in our modern world, social media is the easiest place to meet and talk to people, and so what. I think you talk about this somewhat in the paper, but how we can maybe leverage these digital spaces to somehow, support, these deeper conversations.
Right. Of course. That's a really important question. And there is a movement of people who work both in the tech space and in the peace building space who are trying to create tools online to help build social cohesion as opposed to foment social division. And More in Common is part of this network. It's a growing network. It's been around for a long time. And so I'm going to just give an example of a few organizations that I think are really great that are doing this. And we highlight those in the report. So technology it does have the potential to help people connect across lines of difference in a positive, meaningful way. You just really have to make sure that you're intentional about it. So the first example I want to give is an organization called Soliya. That's Soliya. They're an international organization that facilitates short cross-cultural exchanges online. So this is where participants from all around the world can gather in small, facilitated online groups to discuss current events and global issues that matter to them. And this is really amazing. right? Because I could sign up for this, and the next week I could have a really meaningful conversation with someone, for example, from like Morocco that I would never normally have met. And these opportunities that exist online are also super helpful for people who may not be able to go out into their communities and engage across lines of difference for whatever reason, but you get the opportunity to do this online. But it's really intentional. The way that these spaces are structured are really, a lot of thought has gone into them. Another organization I want to mention is called New Public. So New Public is trying to like reimagine the internet as a public space that fosters connection and facilitates pluralism and encourages civic engagement. And they're doing this in a number of ways, but the most concrete example that I can give right now is that they're helping local communities across the country just redesign their community online forums so that they're places for healthy dialogue and discourse as opposed to polarization. And these are just two organizations. There are many people who are working on this. And I think, again, that's really necessary and important work. But I also want to acknowledge how much social media and online spaces are contributing to social division. And there are many organizations that are also working to basically help kind of slow that down. So the two organizations I just gave, they're trying to create online tools to help build social cohesion. And there are other organizations that are trying to help stop all the social division online. And a lot of that work, I would say, is highlighted by an organization called the Center for Humane Technology. So they're a hub and they do some advocacy work. And they also just host a lot of really great tools and links for anyone to use and download that can help basically make different apps you use less addictive. And it can help people build a better relationship to their technology. So I've used all of their tools. I think they're amazing. My relationship to my technology and different news sites has definitely changed. So I would highly recommend their tools. And I'm only mentioning this now because ultimately, if you want people to connect, you can't do that if you're spending all of your time, like all of your waking hours on all of your devices. So you do need tools to help you build better habits that can therefore free up your time and then also encourage you to connect ideally to more people in person. Kate, do you want to add anything to that?
There's just I think conversation around social media and like how does it add to connection? How does it detract from connection? I just keep reflecting back to Derek Thompson, and he wrote this really wonderful piece called "The Antisocial Century" a couple of months ago. And in the piece, he talks about how like social connection or social media and the internet, it's really solidified maybe some of our our closest friends, the people that we might have grown up with, and we can follow them throughout our life, and we can send memes and videos back and forth, and we can be in constant connection with people, who are some of our closest to us, and then some of our most distant people as well. So if my husband and I, we did a 8,000-mile boat trip before I joined More in Common, and it's called the Great Loop Association. And we were able to connect with boaters from around the country and, learn from one another, build relationships. And so it was really helpful to kind of create that affinity kind of group of people that we never would have been able to connect with, in person or just in our community. But then almost at the expense of, because we spend more time online and it's easy to kind of default into those online kind of behaviors and directions and time spent, then it can detract from our opportunity to be with those who are in our immediate kind of surroundings. And so I think about how do we find that balance? And I think what we're learning from social media now and some of the conversations, Jonathan Haidt is leading in our schools, social media does not replace in-personal connections. It doesn't give you the same skill sets and practice to be able to engage with people and build that trust and relationships. But there are some benefits of it too. So I think it's how do we incorporate it and learn from what it can do well and where we maybe need to be a little bit more intentional about having it not take over everything.
Well, and that makes me think about, whether I think when you talked about the balance and the trade-off, like I know, there's a whole sort of segment of folks that just they really preach hard, like just get off the thing, shut off your phone, get off social media entirely. Well, that doesn't work. Like it's not realistic, right? So we it's going to be there. It's going to influence us. And And so then is balance even right, or is there a place for a digital first strategy?
I think that's what organizations like New Public are advocating for, and they're trying to create the design tools that any software engineers can use in order to ensure that the tech that they're creating drives social cohesion as opposed to driving social division. And right now, the idea that communication technology is neutral, I don't think it has gotten us to a good place in society. And we need to realize that these technologies are extremely powerful, and we need to be designing them towards a positive vision as opposed to letting them just exist and be only profit driven. And again, New Public is an organization that has been working on this for a while now, and I think they have a really great set of ideas. They have a really great framework for how to think and talk about this, as does the Center for Humane Technology as well. Yeah,
that's great. I mean, we always want to highlight, people doing this kind of work in a practical sense, and also, practical actions that regular listeners can take. So, obviously, the report is called Connection Opportunity. So the biggest message is connection opportunity, right? You pretty much put it in the title. But to just a regular listener now, they're maybe not part of the bridge building movement. They're just kind of a regular person trying to get by like the rest of us, and they're frustrated. They're worried. They're scared. I mean, these are some of the biggest questions, biggest emotions you see people that come up frequently. What's something you could tell people that you've learned from this report that can maybe help calm some of those fears?
Yeah, it's a really great question, and I think I just keep coming back to that doing this report has changed my life. And the way that I see how I can play a role in my community. There's a lot of things happening at the national level, and people from a variety of different reasons are right to feel threatened and scared. And if you pay attention to it, which should to a certain extent, like validating those feelings. But I think there's also an opportunity to listen to what are we paying attention to and what are we seeing? And how can I actually play an active role? And that's what I think a lot of this work is really exciting, because literally everybody can play a role in building a culture of connection. And it doesn't have to start with politics, but it adds to this overall ability to build that social trust. And so, for example, in my community, I attend a church, and there was some talk about having to host, small dinners with community members of the church that might not have otherwise met one another. So I raised my hand and said, I can help organize that, and I recognized that was a role that I could play in helping to just facilitate these dinners that I otherwise didn't necessarily think that I had responsibility to, time to think it was actually that important. You're like, yeah, it's nice to just have a couple people have dinner. That's great. But actually seeing it as a way that I can help facilitate stronger community, that I have agency in being able to do that, is really important. It's saying yes to in-person events when you may not feel like it, but I've never regretted not going to something. It's making small talk with a stranger. I'm an introvert. I find this work sometimes draining, but I've really tried to resist that temptation, and I've leaned into it, and I found really wonderful connection opportunities where I've been able to learn about somebody's life in a couple minutes. I've been able to see a smile on someone's face when I've complimented them on something that they're wearing, and I've had to overcome my own kind of anxieties to do that. So there are these small ways, I think, of how can you see in your life that you can build towards this culture of connection, and we all really have an opportunity to do so. And it's just about taking those baby steps, because it really does make a difference. We all have to play a role in this for this to work. We have a shared future together. I think it's about building a community, and again, starting, I think, local, and then once you see those opportunities, they're really everywhere. And I think it can be a nice antidote to maybe some of the anxiety that we're seeing at the national level.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you mentioned it doesn't have to be about politics. I think that's another kind of key to this. Like, you can start getting some practice with these kind of things without necessarily diving into the deep end of the pool right at the beginning.
Yeah, and just to go off on that, I think another key piece that we highlight in our research is about training and like leadership training. Like, a lot of these skills to be able to navigate differences, to be able to hold space for a lot of different viewpoints, that's just not something that we are inherently, or not many of us are inherently born to be able to do naturally. And so it's, how can we think about incorporating opportunities for especially community leaders, business leaders, students, to be able to practice and develop those skills? It can be deep listening, constructive dialogue. So there's a lot of programs that can teach you how to do that and can give you a safe space to practice it, rather than being expected to be thrown into a situation and do it yourself or feel comfortable. And so I think it's about thinking of those resources also, and how do we embed that in college curriculum? How do we embed that in business leadership training and community fellowship programs? There's a way, I think, to also how can we equip ourselves to be better at this as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it does take practice.
I would just like to add, in terms of addressing specifically the fear and the uncertainty around connecting specifically across lines of political difference, we found in our research that a lot of people said one of the main barriers they had to connection across political difference, other than lacking the opportunity, was that they don't think the other side wants to interact with them. And our report found that that's not true. People are interested in interacting across lines of political difference and all the other lines of difference that we studied. And correcting that misperception, I think, is really important in terms of counteracting some of this fear and uncertainty. So when I'm in a situation in my life where I have an opportunity to connect with someone who's different from me, but I'm hesitant because I think to myself, well, maybe they don't want to talk to me. Like, I remind myself of this study that I worked on, and I say, no, that's not true. They probably do. So I am going to extend the offer. I'm going to walk up to them, or I'm going to message them, and I'm going to start a conversation because I know that they're probably interested. And that, I think, is very motivating. It's very hopeful, and it has created a lot of change in my life as well, specifically how I relate to people that I know who have different political viewpoints than me. Knowing that they also care and they also want to talk to you and they're also interested, they also want to learn something from you, I think can really help. It really helps me feel a sense of both excitement, and also it lessens my fear a little bit.
Well, I'm going to bring in, I can hear the listeners in my head a little bit. I'm going to bring in the sort of, I can hear people sort of saying that never works, kind of a little bit, because they're sort of, some people are almost traumatized by some of these interactions that they've had, right? And I can hear them saying, well, the first thing they're going to do is throw out 6 Fox News talking points, or an MSNBC talking point or something, and then it's going to be hard to kind of move forward from there. So, I mean, do you have any? Now we're getting into how do you do dialogue, but I don't know if you have any quick thought. I think we should at least acknowledge that thought.
Yes, absolutely. That's really important to acknowledge. I think it's really important to remind yourself before you enter into a conversation or experience when you're interacting with someone who has a different, specifically political viewpoint than you, why you're doing it. And so I do these things because I really value and care about social connection. And I care about building trust. And I don't want to feel a sense of alienation from my other fellow Americans. I don't want to feel that way. And so I go into these conversations with a very clear sense of why I'm entering them, and also with a grand ambition to improve our democracy. So I really do believe that it's important in a democracy for everyone to feel like they're being heard. And I have a role to play in that because I can listen to people. I can go into a situation and I can give them opportunity to talk to me, and I can listen. And hopefully I can make them feel heard. And so, yes, probably in these situations, people are going to say things that you don't like to hear, that maybe are hurtful, or potentially are misinformed, or whatever. Okay. So And let's see what happens if you stay in the conversation and try to move past those talking points. And what happens is if you ask more questions to try to understand their personal history as to like why they believe these things. And as people often talk about in the bridging space, but really having a sense of curiosity. This work is extremely hard. Some people, especially people who are traumatized by these interactions, you don't have to do it. If you do feel like you can, I like to say, just know that there's like a movement of people behind you supporting your efforts and like cheering you on. And I hope that feels empowering. I really think that the way through our political divisions right now is through social connection. I think that's how we get through this.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think that intentionality is so important. I'm really glad you brought that up.
Yeah, I think the thing I would add to that is, like, as much as we want to be able to control other people, we can't. We can only control ourselves. And so even some of this work, like, also goes into, like, what is your mental well-being too? And in these instances, I try to show up with, I'm going to treat this person with dignity, with respect, and see them as a human. And I'm here because I am curious and I want to understand why they might believe what they believe. And if that person shows up, and I feel like having that kind of mindset can help open up a conversation and relationship rather than trying to come in and try to convince somebody, or if I'm just going to be nice to them, then they're going to agree with me. And that's not actually helpful. And that also can backfire because it can feel very manipulative. But if I come up and show up in that space intentionally, because that's how I want to be treated. Ultimately, I want to feel heard also, and I want to feel understood and respected. If I show up in the way that I want to be treated, that's sometimes the best that you can do. And if that person is not willing to be in that or is being difficult, you can always walk away. And not everybody is able to have the skill sets, the mindset, kind of the disposition to have that conversation, and that's okay. But I think being able to be aware of what you can be in control of, and where your limits are, and reflecting on that is a really great first step that we all can do and work on. Because I think, as Calista said, at the end of the day, like, we are all here together. We got to figure this out. You take a couple of steps the other way and it looks really bad really fast. And so I don't see us as having a choice, in just trying to have to work through, how do we live together? How do we thrive together? And how do we build a shared future that we can be proud of?
Yeah, 100%. Well, Kate Carney and Calista Small, thank you so much for making time for our little program.
Thanks so much. Really, thanks for hosting these conversations. It's really important.
Yes, thank you so much, David.
Yeah, we really, really appreciate those insights.
Great. Thanks, David.
Bye. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye. That is it for this episode of the Outrage Overload podcast. For links to everything we talked about on this episode, go to outrageoverload.net. Want to dive deeper? Check out my Substack at outrageoverload.substack.com or outrageoverload.net/newsletter for more insights beyond the podcast. Subscribe, comment, and join the conversation. If you found this episode valuable, please share it or leave a review. It really helps. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time.